and former State Department official David Tafuri. Welcome to all of you. Great to have you here. So, Morgan, when you saw this, what went through your mind?
Well, listen, the goals that the Biden administration is laying out are saying that we don't want to shrink away from our human rights record, from racism, from other things that we're trying to fix as a society. Okay, I agree with that. That's why we have freedom of the press. That's why we have debates. That's why we have one of the most open and tolerant societies where we have these debates. The question is, should the United Nations Human Rights Council, that has China, Russia, Venezuela, Pakistan, Cuba on the council, should they be the ones to judge our country? I'm going to give you an emphatic no on that. And I quite frankly don't think that there should be any resolution or any judgment of the United States until someone within the United Nations does some sort of judgment on why the United Nations is so anti-Semitic, so racist towards Jews in the state of Israel. Since 2015, I think it's 112 condemning resolutions against the state of Israel, 0 on the genocide against Muslims in Xinjiang in China.
Okay, great points. David, so given all that, why did the Biden administration rejoin the UN Human Rights Council in the first place?
Well, I think the Biden administration is saying human rights are important. We're going to be part of the Human Rights Council. It doesn't mean we're going to agree with everything they do. With respect to allowing the Human Rights Council to do an evaluation of racism in the United States, and again, that's all they're doing. They're just allowing them to do an evaluation, basically write a report. They're not having a trial or any kind of hearing about it. We're saying we're not hiding anything. We are a transparent country. We're a leader in human rights and demanding that other countries follow human rights. What's really important about this is China has a terrifying human rights record. There are more than 1 million Uyghurs who are in work camps. It's a genocide against the Uyghurs. And what we're taking away from China is what they do all the time, which is whataboutism. Anytime we criticize China for its human rights record or how it treats Uyghurs, they say, what about racism in the U.S.? And we're saying we're happy to be evaluated for racism in the U.S., but you can't, there's no moral equivalency between racism in the U.S. and a genocide that's happening right now in China, and we need to hold China on account for that. So does the UN, and we're demanding both.
Yeah, but I guess the question is, and Tomi, I want to address this to you. I see you shaking your head. You know, we have the transparent structures within our system that Morgan just talked about that are quite clear. So why would we invite these countries to assess us on our own soil, Tomi?
Well, the American apology tour continues under this administration, but we have to ask why. Why would Team Biden and his State Department, why would they invite this? Well, the answer is very simple. They have to continue the narrative, the charade, if you will, that this country is systemically racist and oppressive. If they don't do that, then they have no excuse for the lawlessness and the placation to groups that are really terrorizing our streets, BLM, Antifa. And the second reason that they want to do this is because the left isn't really anti-law and order. They just would rather have law and order at a global level, and they also want to have more federal government control, more global government control. And by inviting in this scrutiny, by apologizing for America, by continuing the narrative that we are racist and we are oppressive, they're able to excuse a lot of what they're doing right now and the fundamental changes that they're making to our nation, especially at a global level, at a federal level. That is what this is all about. They have to continue that narrative.
Senator Marco Rubio spoke out on this just moments ago. Watch this.
It's stupid, but it actually, why isn't he convening the United Nations Security Council to talk about the fact that this Sunday and throughout the week, a regime 90 miles from our shores has been killing people because they went out demanding liberty? That's what they should be looking at. So if you're going to invite the UN to come in the U.S. to tell us how racist we are, you should at least also ask them to look into the horrifying situation that's unfolding in Cuba.
So, Morgan, speaking of that horrifying situation unfolding in Cuba, I think about some of the things that the United States could be doing, sending food, sending medicine, for example. And isn't there something that we could do with our cyber warfare capability to make an effort to reopen the social networks for the freedom fighters in Cuba? This is the kind of thing that perhaps a lot of Americans would love to hear the Secretary of State screaming from the mountaintops right now.
Yeah, and Senator Rubio has talked about how we should open up the internet for people in Cuba. I mean, that's one of the things that we saw around the world. We saw this happen in Iran, where the first thing that these regimes do is cut off internet, cut off access for people to communicate with each other. And that's why it's important to do everything that we have within our cyber capabilities to help these people. We're talking about the largest protests since the 1950s, and you're seeing played out before our very eyes communism and what this sort of socialist dictatorship does to innocent people who have just been living with this for decades. So I agree with you. It's important for us to speak out about this. It's important for us to support them. And certainly we took, in the Trump administration under Mike Pompeo, a very, very tough line against the Cuban regime, not only for what they were doing to their people, but what we also saw them doing in Venezuela when they were sending operatives, military-type operatives into Venezuela in order to try to pop up Maduro as well.
Yeah, David, it's a great point. And, you know, if you want to talk about human rights, why isn't Secretary of State Blinken, why isn't President Biden right now taking some of these really hard, clear measures that could be taken to support the people who are on the streets, and including those who've already been pulled off the street and have disappeared in Cuba?
Well, the Biden administration does support the protesters in Cuba. What's great about the protests in Cuba right now is they're organic. They started. The protests started in Cuba, and so we have to be somewhat careful. We want the protests to continue to be a Cuban-initiated event. We don't want the Cuban government to be able to claim that the U.S. is pushing for this. So my guess is the Biden administration is already evaluating ideas like the one Morgan mentioned, which is very important, which is figure out a way to make sure the protesters can still access the internet, which is so important for organizing protests and continuing the anger inside Cuba. I would also note that the Biden administration has kept all of the sanctions that the Trump administration put on Cuba in place. There's a reason the Biden administration kept those sanctions in place, because they have the same approach and the same view of the Cuban government, which is it is illegitimate, it's a human rights abuser, and there should be democracy in Cuba. It's how do we get there, and how do we help the people of Cuba get Cuba there?
Yeah, doing the things that we're talking about doesn't take away any agency from the Cuban people in any way. I would also suggest that Twitter and Facebook look into how they can reopen those channels for social media in Cuba for these people. They could manage, they could really benefit from some good PR at this point in the United States, and that might go a long way. Before I let you guys go, I want to mention that Tomi is going to be speaking this weekend at the Turning Point USA Student Action Summit on Sunday, and that's going to be streaming on Live Nation, and we're all looking forward to that. We'll see you there, Tomi. Thank you very much, you guys. Great to see you all today.